Good morning, Year 6, on yet another freezing, frosty February day. Tell you what, much better being indoors in school or in your house than being in the trenches, though. Think back to then. Imagine being in a trench in weather like this. Would not have been pleasant at all. Okay, so last history lesson of the half term, our key question is, how should we remember the war? Your task is going to be linked to outlining how key historical events should be remembered. Not just the war itself, but how we should remember other historical events as well. So, 3 parts to the lesson. First, bit of a starter. We're going to sort some statements of the World War One or World War Two. Then we're going to look at the Mentimeter that you completed at the start of the week. So some of the questions that you wanted answering. And then we're going to look at today's assignment. So we've got 2 columns here, World War One, World War Two, and we've got those things in the middle there in the white text. I want you to sort them. Do they go into the World War One box or World War Two, or should they be left in the middle? A bit like a Venn diagram. Are they World War One, World War Two, or both? So you need to pause the video now and see if you can work out which box each of them should go in. So this is how you should have sorted all of those cards. Now let's have a look at some of them in a bit more detail. Now, one of your questions that somebody left on the Mentimeter was about the start of World War II, but one of the key events that led to World War I beginning was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was heir to the Austrian throne, and he was killed in Bosnia by a Serbian. And that was one of the things that led Austria to declaring war on Serbia, and people's allies then started to join the fight. There's a really good Horrible Histories video about the start of World War One. If you want to look that up on YouTube, it explains it really well. So have a look at that. The first tank was used in World War One. They were nothing like the tanks that we have today. Very primitive, but that was the first time a tank was used. And although Hitler led Nazi Germany in World War II, or leading up to World War II as well, he actually served in the German army during World War I. Now there's a fact that I picked up, I'm sure it was in a Horrible Histories book once upon a time, but Hitler was the only survivor of his regiment when a bomb exploded near them. He was actually the only person who survived out of his unit. That's a cruel twist of fate there. Trenches, we mentioned trenches at the start of the lesson. Trenches were used in both World War I and World War II. Very difficult conditions for soldiers to live in. And what they did, that's where they had to live for their time at the front. A couple of things that you should have recognised from previous lessons. This term we've got the Blitz and the Battle of Britain. They were 2 World War II events, and the Holocaust that we covered last week. The atomic bomb. That's something that you could look up yourself. That was an event at the end of World War II involving the USA and the Japanese. So we've got the second part of the lesson now, the question and answer. And this was the Mentimeter. It was what aspect of World War II would you like to know more about? Submit your responses and we'll look at some in the lesson later this week. Well, that's what we're about to do now. As I've already mentioned, this was a question that came up. A couple of people discussing how World War II started, but also how Adolf Hitler came to power. So that's what we'll look at now, Hitler's rise to power. Now, in terms of Hitler actually coming to lead Germany, it's just a very complicated series of events, actually. Now, I was mentioned that Hitler had served in the German army. Hitler was in fact Austrian, so he wasn't actually German by birth, but that didn't stop him coming to power in Germany. He was the leader of what was at the time a political party, a genuine political party. The Nazis was short for the Nationalsozialistische Partei, which is the National Socialist Party, and they were up for election in the early 1930s. So you can see some of their election posters here. Unsere letzte Hoffnung, which means our last hope, and Arbeit und Brot, which means jobs and bread. Now, these were designed to appeal to lots of the Germans who were unemployed at the time. So there was a lot of poverty and unemployment in Germany after the First World War. We'll look at that on one of the next slides. And their campaign, their adverts targeted these voters with the idea of bringing Germany back to greatness. And so we've got these key dates here to show the stages of the Nazis coming to power, and how Hitler was then able to turn Germany into a dictatorship where they followed everything that he commanded, as opposed to being a democracy that we have in this country and in Germany now. So in 1933, at the start of 1933, Hitler was able to pass a series of laws that enabled him to make his own laws without asking for the approval of other politicians. Then they were put in control of local governments, or the governments in different areas in Germany, which meant that Hitler now had control of police, education, and other elements of government. And Hitler was banning trade unions, so workers could not oppose Hitler. They couldn't rise against him. He banned any of the new political parties being set up. So he took control of which political groups were allowed to exist in Germany, which meant that eventually the only party that was allowed was his Nazi party. So there were no alternatives. 1934, just under a year later, it was known as the Night of the Long Knives. So Hitler and his allies within the Nazi party, he had other members shot, and also other prominent public figures shot, in case they were to stand against him. So he basically eliminating any opposition. And then when Hindenburg dies in 1934, August, Hitler makes himself effectively the leader, the president, or as it was known then, the Führer, which means the leader of Germany, and the army swears oath to be loyal only to Hitler, and he therefore becomes a dictator. He has control of the army and the people. How did this all end up in war? Well, highlighted in yellow there is the main reason, the German invasion of Poland. But there were things leading up to that. Now, I said Hitler was able to come to power, the Nazi Party were able to achieve success in elections because of the circumstances in Germany at the time. Now, after World War I had finished and Germany had lost, they were forced to sign an agreement that meant that they were in debt to other countries like Britain and France. So Germany was extremely poor after the war because they'd had to give away land and goods to the other countries. So the people were at a very low point. And Hitler came to power with that idea of restoring pride and power of Germany, so bringing Germany back to greatness. Alongside that, on the other side of the world, Japan were seeking to dominate Asia, so to expand their empire. And following World War I, when there'd been so much death and destruction, other nations such as Britain wanted to be cautious and didn't want to get drawn into a second World War. However, at the start of 1939, Germany invaded the Sudetenland and what is modern-day Czech Republic and Slovakia. So Germany invaded and conquered those areas. And then further to that, later in 1939, Germany invaded Poland. So they expanded their forces out into Poland. Poland, being one of Britain and France's allies, led to us and France declaring war on Germany. Again, there are lots of good videos on YouTube that explain this in a bit more detail, so you can look through how there was a chain of events, or a chain reaction, if you like, of events that caused World War II to begin. The second aspect we're going to look at is warfare, so the fighting itself. Lucy had said, I want to learn more about the fight, the weapons they used and the guns they shot. And Lucy's actually been watching a documentary on Netflix called World War II in Colour. I've seen it as well, Lucy. I agree. Very interesting.
So again, then in Google, if you go and search DLI collection, DLI being Durham Light Infantry, and then you can select that first result there. What it'll do will take you into the Durham website, and you can. There's quite a lot of things that you can look through here. Some digital collections. There is a memorial book and some information about the DLI and its history. But if you go on the digital collections, again within this you can see the medal collection. But if you want to look specifically at some of the weapons, you can go into the objects and then click this option here, and it will go through some of the weapons used historically by the DLI. You can select each one and find a bit more information about it.
And finally, death in war. Now, a couple of people talking about children dying. Well, I'm assuming you mean the evacuees. Would parents know if their children had died when they were over in another part of the country? How would they find out? Did they have funerals? But I'm just going to have a look at something a bit more general, if you like, to do with death in war, when people died at home and abroad. So if we're going to look at evacuees first of all, now obviously the purpose of evacuation of women and children was to take them out of danger, to take them out of harm's way where the Germans might have bombed. So in order to stop them from dying, that's why they were evacuated. Now, although I don't have the records to hand, of course there will have been examples of children who were evacuated and then died in the place where they were evacuated. But that would have been totally dependent on individual circumstances. You know, what the places that they were evacuated to were away from most of the danger. There could have been attacks, especially stray attacks, where the bombers had targeted the wrong area. And of course, you know, could have been natural causes, accidents, that sort of thing. But that might be something you could do a bit of research into yourself. Now, in terms of the parents themselves, now there were lots of cases of children being evacuated and then their parents being killed, or the other members of their family, because if they stayed in the big cities. In some cases, then those children obviously stayed with the family that they had been evacuated to, or they could have returned home and lived with another family member. It was also possible that some of the children who'd been evacuated were then brought back home, especially towards the start of the process. A lot of children were obviously very homesick. Some of the parents wanted their children back as well, so they actually brought them back to the cities. And there was a whole government propaganda drive to try and convince parents to let their children remain where they were, so as to keep them safe. Now, so we can look at also some of the soldiers as well, the stories of the soldiers who died. We can actually find out a lot about this in our local area as well. Some of the soldiers from our area, or who were brought back to the local area after they were killed in war.
So if you go into Google and type Commonwealth War, now interestingly, it wasn't just men who were buried here as well. You see this woman here, Lillian Martin. Here she served in the Women's Royal Naval Service, and she died in 1943, aged 25. Okay, so both men and women who served in the war are buried here. So you can use that search function to look at some of the local cemeteries and find out a bit more about some of the people from the area who served in both the First and the Second World Wars. You can see the website also includes photographs of the cemetery as well, and where the graves are found.
Okay, so here's a list of really good resources. Some of them we've covered already, but I'll attach this to the assignment on Teams as well. So we've got the Durham Light Infantry collection, we've got the Commonwealth War Graves website where we looked at the local cemetery. A series of clips and programmes from the BBC website called Remembering the Wars. Remember, Lucy had also mentioned that Netflix documentary, if any of you have Netflix at home. The Royal British Legion, lots of information about remembrance. North East War Memorials Project, again featuring some of the local memorials. And then a bit of an interesting thing to consider here, how Germany remembers the war. Okay, because obviously it's an important historical event across the world, but considering it from their perspective as well, how Germany remembers the war. There's a clip there on BBC News. So then, the task, to outline how key historical events should be remembered. 3 things to think about when you look at this. What are the key features of memorials? It could be physical memorials or acts. What must be included? How can we show their importance? How can we get across the importance of the memorial and what they represent? There are some examples here, include a few pictures of local memorials across County Durham. There's a couple other examples there. So remember thinking about what must be included, what you're going to do to show the importance, how you're going to get that across. So this slide will be attached to the assignment on Teams. And then when you've completed your task, if you design your memorial, upload photos via Teams or send them to the Year 6 email. And then if you've made something perhaps in 3D or an image, then you can bring it into school when we return, whenever that will be, hopefully not too long now. Really good website to link to at the end there if you want to have some extra activities or challenges. And the National Archives website has lots of good educational sessions and resources linked to the Second World War. So if you find yourself with a bit of free time wanting to do a bit more history, or if you submit a question that we haven't covered yet, you might find your answers in there. Okay, that's it for this week, Year 6 for the video lessons. Have a great half term. Try not to freeze too much, and hopefully we'll see you very soon. And as Vera Lynn said, we'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when. Well, we don't know when, but we do know where. Look it up on YouTube. Good song. Bye for now.